Tonight we walk through the quiet streets of ancient Rome, not as tourists in search of monuments, but as guests invited into the private world of Roman honor. Imagine dawn breaking over marble rooftops, the air cool and still as the first carts rattle across stone streets. You pass through shaded courtyards where sandals echo softly, through colonnades where oil lamps glow against painted walls, and into forums where voices carry the weight of reputation more than the words themselves. In this journey, we will not chase battles or conquests. Instead, we will step into the rhythm of daily Roman life, guided by values the Romans themselves called virtus, fides, gravitas, and pietas. These were not just words, they were the unseen rules that shaped every action, every glance, every promise kept or broken. Tonight, as we drift into the eternal city, we will see how duty, dignity, and trust wove together the fabric of Roman existence. So settle in. The marble streets await, and with them the quiet strength of a world where honor was life itself. Dawn over the eternal city. The darkness that holds the 7 hills of Rome is not a true black, but a deep, resonant blue, softened by the starlight and the distant eternal glow of the moon. A quiet coolness hangs in the air, a final, gentle reprieve before the Mediterranean sun begins its inexorable climb. Down in the valleys between the hills, in the warren of narrow, winding streets, the city still dreams. The only sounds are the soft rustle of a stray dog nosing through discarded scraps from yesterday's market, or the lonely, echoing footsteps of the night watchmen, their sandals scuffing a steady, rhythmic beat against the worn basalt stones of the road. But the first hint of change is coming. It begins not as light, but as a subtle shift in the air, a lightening of the eastern horizon from indigo to a soft, pearlescent gray. From the heights of the Palatine Hill, where the grand houses of the wealthy and powerful sleep behind shuttered windows and high walls, one could watch this transformation unfold in silent majesty. The marble of the temples on the Capitoline Hill begins to separate itself from the shadows, first as a faint, ghostly outline, and then, as the light strengthens, it takes on a soft, rosy hue. It is the color of a seashell, delicate and fragile, as if the massive stone structures were blushing at the sun's first touch. Below, in the great open space of the Forum Romanum, the statues of heroes and ancestors stand as silent gray sentinels, their bronze and marble faces impassive, having witnessed this same awakening for centuries. They have seen the Republic rise, and they are watching, even now, as the empire stretches its limbs. The air begins to stir, a gentle breeze, cool and smelling of damp earth, stone, and the distant scent of baking bread from the first ovens being lit in the Subura district, drifts through the empty colonnades. And then the sounds begin. They are small at first, isolated notes in a slowly building symphony. The crow of a rooster, its call sharp and clear, cutting through the morning stillness. The distant metallic clang of a blacksmith's hammer, a single deliberate strike as a craftsman begins his day's work before the heat becomes unbearable. From the lower floors of the tall, precarious apartment blocks, the insulae, comes the sound of a wooden shutter being unlatched and pushed open, its groan a familiar complaint. A voice calls out, low and indistinct, followed by the soft clatter of pottery. The city is stirring in its sleep. Soon, the rumbling begins. It's a low, deep vibration that you feel in the soles of your feet before you hear it. The heavy, iron-rimmed wheels of supply carts, which were forbidden from the city streets during the daylight hours to ease congestion, are making their final, urgent journeys.
They lumber over the uneven stones, their axles groaning under the weight of grain from Ostia, wine from Campania, and olive oil from Spain. The drivers shout, their voices hoarse, urging their straining mules and oxen through the waking streets.
Life in Rome is governed by unseen forces, by codes and expectations that are as solid and unyielding as the stone of the Colosseum. As the light fills the sky, turning from pink to a brilliant liquid gold that spills over the rooftops, it illuminates not just a city of marble and brick, but a city of intricate social connections. Every person waking up, from the senator in his sprawling villa to the baker in his cramped shop, is bound by these codes. Their every action, every word, every public gesture will be weighed and measured against an ancient, unwritten standard. This standard is honor. It is the quiet air they breathe, the invisible architecture that holds their society together. As the sun clears the horizon and floods the forum with clean, sharp light, the day has truly begun. The doors are opening, the people are pouring into the streets, and the great, silent stage of Roman life is set. Every citizen is an actor, and their performance today and every day will determine their place in this demanding, magnificent, and eternal city. The weight of their ancestors, the gaze of the gods, and the judgment of their neighbors are upon them. And so, they walk out into the morning, cloaked in a dignity as carefully worn as the folds of their toga.
The Roman idea of honor. To understand the Roman mind, one must first understand what they meant by honor. For us, the word might conjure images of chivalry, of duels at dawn, or a deeply personal internal sense of integrity. But for the Romans, honor, honus, was something more tangible, more public, and infinitely more complex. It was not merely a feeling or a private virtue, it was a public commodity, a form of social currency that was earned, displayed, protected, and sometimes, tragically, lost. It was the sum total of a person's reputation, their standing in the community, and their perceived worth in the eyes of others. It was inseparable from dignitas, a concept that translates roughly to prestige, standing, or worthiness. A man with dignitas was a man who commanded respect not through force, but through the sheer weight of his character and his contributions to the state. Imagine honor not as a flame burning within the heart, but as a light that shone from a person, a light that was visible to all. The brightness of this light depended on many things. It was influenced by your lineage, having illustrious ancestors who had served Rome as consuls or generals gave you a brighter starting point. The imagenes, the wax masks of these ancestors, kept in the atrium of the family home, were a constant, silent reminder of the standard you were expected to uphold. Your honor was also built through your own actions. Serving with courage in the legions, speaking with wisdom and persuasion in the Senate, governing a province with justice and integrity, or simply fulfilling your duties as a citizen with unwavering seriousness, all of these polished and brightened that light. Even wealth played a part, not for its own sake, but for what it allowed a man to do. A wealthy Roman was expected to be a public benefactor, to use his fortune to build temples, repair aqueducts, or sponsor games for the people. This generosity, or liberalitas, was a key component of his public honor.
This concept of honor was overwhelmingly a public performance. A Roman nobleman's life was lived on a stage. His very home, the domus, was designed with this in mind. The front part of the house, the atrium and the tablinum, was a semi-public space where he received his clients and conducted his business. His conduct here, his manner of speaking, his generosity, his composure, all were observed and judged. When he walked to the forum, he did not rush. He moved with a slow, deliberate gait, a physical manifestation of his gravitas, his seriousness of purpose. The way he wore his toga, with its heavy, carefully arranged folds, was a statement of his status and his adherence to tradition. Every gesture was freighted with meaning. In the Senate, a debate was not just a clash of ideas, it was a duel of dignitas. An insult was not merely a personal affront, it was a public attack on a man's honor, and by extension his family's honor, which had to be answered not with violence, but with a more powerful speech, a more cutting remark, or a legal challenge that would restore his damaged standing. This system was not limited to the elite. While a common plebeian might not aspire to the consulship, he still had his own sphere of honor. A craftsman's honor lay in the quality of his work and his reputation for fairness. A soldier's honor was tied to his bravery and his loyalty to his standard. A farmer's honor was in his hard work and the productivity of his land. For everyone, honor was about fulfilling their designated role within the great complex machine of Roman society. It was about being a good Roman. And the loss of this honor was a kind of social death. To be branded infamous, dishonored, was to be stripped of your legal and social standing. It meant you could not vote, hold office, or even represent yourself in court. It was to become a ghost in your own city. And so the pursuit and protection of honor was not a pastime. It was the central driving ambition of a Roman's life, a constant quiet pressure that shaped every decision, from the grandest political maneuver to the smallest daily interaction.
Pietas, duty to the gods and family. In the soft, flickering light of an oil lamp in the central atrium of a Roman home stands a small shrine. It is the lararium, the sacred heart of the household. Within this small, often beautifully painted niche are a few small figurines. Two of them are the lares, youthful figures and dancing poses, protectors of the home and family. Between them might be a figure representing the genius, the guardian spirit of the pater familias, the head of the household. And nearby are the penates, the gods who guard the pantry, ensuring the family's sustenance and prosperity. This small, humble altar is the focal point of one of the most fundamental Roman virtues, pietas. We might translate pietas as piety or devotion, but its meaning was far broader and more profound. It was a sense of duty, a respectful obligation that a Roman owed to the three pillars of their existence: the gods, their family, and their country. The day for a devout Roman family would begin here at the lararium. The paterfamilias, with his family gathered around him, would offer a simple prayer. A pinch of salted flour might be sprinkled onto a small burning brazier, its smoke curling upwards as a fragrant offering. A small portion of wine from the previous evening's meal would be poured out as a libation. It was a small, quiet, and deeply personal ritual, a daily reaffirmation of the bond between the family and the divine powers that protected them. This was pietas in its most intimate form, a recognition that the family's well-being, its health, and its good fortune were not solely the result of human effort, but were gifts from the gods, gifts that required gratitude and respect in return. This sense of duty extended beyond the home. It meant observing the public festivals, offering the correct sacrifices at the great temples of Jupiter, Mars, and Juno, and respecting the omens and auguries that the priests read in the flight of birds or the entrails of sacrificed animals. To neglect these duties was not just an act of impiety, it was an act of reckless foolishness, an invitation for divine displeasure.
But pietas was just as much about duty to family. It was the bedrock of the Roman social structure. It was the profound respect a son owed his father, the paterfamilias, whose authority over the family was, in theory, absolute. It was the loyalty a wife owed her husband and the care she took in raising their children to understand and respect the old ways. And, most powerfully, it was the duty owed to one's ancestors. A Roman saw himself not as an isolated individual, but as a single link in a long, unbroken chain stretching back through generations. The family name, the family's reputation had been passed down to him, and it was his sacred duty to preserve it, enhance it, and pass it on, untarnished, to his own children. This is why funeral rites were so important. The processions, the eulogies praising the deceased's virtues, the careful maintenance of the family tomb, all were expressions of pietas. It was a way of honoring the debt owed to those who had come before. This sense of duty culminated in pietas towards the state, towards Rome itself. For the Romans, patriotism was a religious obligation. The city was not just a collection of buildings, it was a sacred entity, protected by its own gods and sanctified by centuries of tradition and sacrifice. To serve Rome as a soldier on a distant frontier, as a magistrate in a provincial town, or as a senator debating in the Curia was the ultimate expression of pietas. The legendary hero Aeneas, the mythical founder of the Roman people, was the ultimate exemplar of this virtue. His defining epithet was pius Aeneas. He was pious not because he was gentle or kind, but because he consistently chose duty over his own personal desires. He abandoned his love Dido in Carthage, not out of cruelty, but because the gods commanded him to sail to Italy and found a new city. He made the hard choice, the choice of duty. This was the ideal that every Roman was taught to admire. Pietas was the internal compass that guided a Roman through life, a constant, quiet reminder of their obligations. It was the understanding that their life was not entirely their own. It belonged to their gods, their family, and their city.
Gravitas, the weight of dignity. There is a quality that the Romans admired above almost all others, a trait they sought to cultivate in their leaders and in themselves. It is a word that has no simple single translation, but its essence can be felt. The word is gravitas. It literally means weight or heaviness, but its metaphorical meaning is far richer. It speaks of seriousness, dignity, and a profound sense of responsibility. It is the very opposite of frivolity, of flightiness, of being easily swayed by emotion or passing fashion. A man with gravitas was a man of substance. His words carried weight because they were not spoken lightly. His presence in a room commanded attention, not through loudness, but through a calm, centered, and unwavering composure. Imagine a Roman senator walking through the forum. He does not hurry. His pace is measured, deliberate. His toga, a cumbersome and heavy garment of pure white wool, is arranged in precise traditional folds. To wear it correctly required care and attention, and its very weight forced a man to move with a certain stateliness. His expression is serious, not grim or sad, but composed. He does not laugh loudly or gesticulate wildly. His gaze is steady and direct. When he speaks, his voice is controlled, his sentences well-formed. He does not waste words. This is the physical embodiment of gravitas. It was a performance, to be sure, but it was a performance that was deeply ingrained, a second nature for the Roman elite. It was a constant, non-verbal declaration of their fitness to lead, a signal to the world that they took their duties to their family, to their clients, to the Senate, and to the gods with the utmost seriousness. This ideal was instilled from a young age.
In the political arena, gravitas was an essential weapon. In the noisy, chaotic world of the late Republic, where political rivalries were fierce and often violent, the ability to remain calm, to speak with authority and deliberation, could be far more powerful than shouting. When Cato the Younger stood in the Senate to oppose Julius Caesar, his power came not from populist rhetoric, but from his unyielding, stern adherence to traditional Roman virtues. He was the very picture of ancestral gravitas, a living rebuke to the ambition and radicalism he saw around him. His opponents might have had more legions or more popular support, but Cato had the weight of tradition on his side. His seriousness gave his arguments a moral force that was difficult to dismiss. Even in private life, gravitas was valued. The paterfamilias was expected to govern his household with a steady, serious hand. He was the firm anchor in the life of his family, a source of stability and moral authority. His gravitas reassured his wife, his children, and his servants that the household was in safe, responsible hands. This is not to say that Romans never laughed or felt joy. They had their festivals, their dinner parties, their moments of private relaxation. But the public face, the ideal that they presented to the world, was one of sober, dignified control. Gravitas was the invisible armor of a Roman of consequence. It was the quiet, internal ballast that kept him steady in the turbulent seas of public life. It was the silent declaration that he was a man to be taken seriously, a man worthy of the name Roman, a man who understood the profound weight of his own existence and his place in the grand, continuing story of his city.
Fides, the bond of trust. In a world without complex legal contracts enforced by a global banking system, how did society function? How were deals made, promises kept, and alliances forged? For the Romans, the answer lay in a simple but profoundly powerful concept: fides. Often translated as faith, trust, or good faith, fides was the invisible glue that held Roman society together, from the highest levels of state diplomacy to the most basic transaction in the marketplace. It was a sacred bond, a promise that was considered as binding as any written law, often more so. The goddess Fides herself had one of the oldest temples in Rome, a testament to how central this value was to the Roman identity. To give your fides, to give your word, was to place your honor in the hands of another. To break it was to commit one of the most shameful acts a Roman could imagine. Imagine two Roman businessmen meeting in the Forum. One is a merchant who imports grain. The other is a baker. They need to make an agreement for a future delivery of wheat. There are no lawyers present, no lengthy documents to sign. Instead, the two men look each other in the eye, they state the terms of their agreement, and then they clasp right hands. This handshake, the dextrarum junctio, was not a casual greeting. It was a physical symbol of the bond of fides being created between them. In that moment, each man's reputation was on the line. The merchant was trusting the baker to pay on delivery, and the baker was trusting the merchant to deliver the grain as promised at the agreed-upon quality and price. If either man broke his word, the financial loss would be secondary to the damage to his reputation. Word would spread quickly through the tight-knit commercial community. A man who could not be trusted, a man without fides, would soon find that no one would do business with him. He would be an outcast. This concept extended
Even in international relations, fides was paramount. When Rome made a treaty with a foreign king or a conquered tribe, it was done in the name of Fides Populi Romani, the good faith of the Roman people. Rome prided itself on keeping its word, on honoring its treaties. This reputation for reliability was a powerful diplomatic tool. Allies were more likely to remain loyal, and enemies were more likely to surrender if they believed that the terms offered by Rome would be honored. Of course, the Romans could be ruthless and pragmatic, and they sometimes interpreted their treaty obligations in self-serving ways. But the ideal, the principle they publicly espoused, was that Rome's word was its bond. Breaking a treaty without just cause was seen as a grave religious and moral transgression that would offend the gods and stain the Republic's honor. The story of Marcus Atilius Regulus was taught to every Roman schoolboy as the ultimate example of fides. Captured by Carthage during the First Punic War, he was sent back to Rome on parole to negotiate a peace treaty or a prisoner exchange. He gave his word of honor that he would return to Carthage if the negotiations failed. When he arrived in Rome, he advised the Senate to reject the Carthaginian terms, arguing that it was not in Rome's best interest. Then, despite the pleas of his family and friends, he honored his oath and returned to Carthage, where he knew he would be tortured and executed. For the Romans, Regulus was a hero of the highest order, a man who valued his fides, his honor, more than his own life. Fides was more than just honesty. It was the expectation of reliability, the foundation of social stability, and the mark of a truly honorable Roman. It was the quiet, unspoken promise that made their world work.
The Forum as a stage. The very name evokes images of ruined columns and sun-drenched stones, a quiet testament to a bygone era. But in its time, it was anything but quiet. It was the vibrant, beating, and often chaotic heart of Rome. It was a marketplace, a courthouse, a religious center, and a political arena all rolled into one. But more than anything else, it was a stage. It was a vast, open-air theater where the drama of Roman public life was performed daily, and the currency of every performance was honor. Every man of consequence who stepped onto the paving stones of the Forum was, in that moment, an actor under the scrutiny of 1,000 critical eyes. His reputation could be made or broken here, in the space of a single speech or a single public act. Picture the scene on a busy morning. The space is thronged with people from every walk of life. Senators in their white togas with the broad purple stripe move in slow, deliberate processions, accompanied by their entourages of clients and aides. Businessmen gather in the Basilica Aemilia, its vast covered hall echoing with the murmur of negotiations. Moneylenders sit at their tables, the mensari, their coins clinking as they conduct their transactions. Common citizens mill about, meeting friends, exchanging news and gossip, or simply soaking in the atmosphere of power. Above it all, on the rostra, the speaker's platform adorned with the bronze prows of captured warships, an orator arises to address the crowd. The moment he ascends those steps, he is utterly exposed. The crowd falls silent, their faces turned up towards him. They judge his posture. Does he stand tall and firm, a picture of confidence and gravitas? Or does he fidget and slump, betraying a lack of conviction? They judge his gestures. The art of rhetoric, as taught to every upper-class Roman boy, included precise instructions on how to use one's hands. A gesture that was too large or too theatrical might be seen as undignified, more fitting for an actor in a play than a serious statesman. A gesture that was too timid would suggest weakness. The perfect orator used his hands to emphasize his points with controlled, authoritative motions. They judged his voice, its pitch, its volume, its cadence. All were carefully modulated. He had to project to the edges of the crowd without shouting, to convey passion without losing control, to use moments of quiet to draw the listeners in. And of course, they judged his words. A speech in the Forum was a high-stakes duel of honor. An orator might be there to propose a new law, to defend a client in a public trial, or to attack a political rival. In doing so, he was putting his own dignitas on the line. He would use every tool at his disposal. He would appeal to tradition, invoking the glorious deeds of the ancestors. He would praise the virtus, manly courage of his allies, and question the motives of his opponents.
An attack on a rival was rarely a simple disagreement over policy. It was often a full-scale assault on his character. An opponent might be accused of luxury, of effeminacy, of greed, or worst of all, of aspiring to be a king. The goal was to strip away his public honor, to leave him exposed and shamed before the Roman people.
The Roman patron and client. Long before the sun had fully risen over the city, while the air was still cool and the shadows long, a daily ritual began in the homes of Rome's powerful men. This was the salutatio, the morning greeting, and it was the cornerstone of the patron-client system, one of the most fundamental social structures in the Roman world. It was a system built on a delicate, unwritten contract of mutual obligation, a web of loyalty and support that connected the highest echelons of society with the lowest, all held together by the binding force of fides and the constant negotiation of honor. Imagine you are a client. You might be a poor plebeian, a small shopkeeper, a struggling poet, or even a moderately wealthy man who needs the influence of someone more powerful. You rise before dawn, put on your best toga, a garment you might only wear for this occasion, and make your way through the waking streets to the grand domus of your patron. You are not alone. A crowd of other clients is already gathering at his door, waiting patiently. The patron's slaves, the janitor at the door, and the nomenclator, whose job it is to remember everyone's name, manage the flow of people. When it is your turn, you are ushered into the atrium, the grand, semi-public reception hall of the house. The atrium is designed to impress, with its high ceiling open to the sky, a marble basin, the impluvium, to catch rainwater, and the stern wax masks of the patron's ancestors looking down from their cabinets. Your patron, the patronus, stands or sits in the tablinum, the office-like space at the back of the atrium. You approach him, bow your head respectfully, and greet him with the title Domina, or Lord. Your purpose here is twofold. First, you are here to pay your respects, to visibly demonstrate your loyalty. Your presence in this crowd is a public affirmation of your patron's importance. The size of his morning crowd was a direct measure of his influence and his dignitas. A powerful man had a large and diverse crowd of clients. Second, you are here to ask for something. Perhaps you need a small gift of money or food, the sportula, to get through the day. Perhaps you are involved in a lawsuit and need your patron to speak for you or provide a character reference. Perhaps you simply need his advice on a business matter. You make your request quietly and respectfully.
In return, the patron has obligations to you. He's expected to provide this help his officium, or duty. It was a mark of his honor to look after his clients. A patron who was stingy or unhelpful would quickly lose his following and with it, his prestige. But his primary benefit was your loyalty. You were expected to vote for him, or for any candidate he supports, in the public assemblies. You were expected to accompany him to the forum, swelling his entourage and adding to his public presence. You were expected to be a loyal supporter, to spread his praises and defend his reputation against his rivals. It was a system of reciprocal benefits. Your loyalty was exchanged for his protection and assistance. This relationship was deeply personal and was often inherited, passed down through generations. A son would inherit his father's clients, and they, in turn, would pledge their loyalty to him. This created a vast, intricate network of personal allegiances that underpinned the entire political and social fabric of Rome. It was a system that could be seen as deeply unequal, a pyramid of power with the great nobles at the top and the poor masses at the bottom. But for the Romans, it was a natural and necessary order. It provided a social safety net, however meager, for the poor, and it gave the powerful a base of popular support. It was a constant, daily transaction of honor. The client offered the honor of his loyalty,
and the patron demonstrated the honor of his generosity and power. The morning salutatio was the quiet daily renewal of this fundamental Roman bond.
The Senate's marble halls. Step out of the noisy, bustling forum and into the cool, solemn quiet of the Curia Hostilia, the Senate House of Rome. The transition is immediate and profound. The air inside feels different, heavier. The light, filtering in through high clerestory windows, illuminates a space that is both grand and austere. The hall is a simple rectangle, with tiered marble benches rising on either side. At the far end, on a raised dais, is the curule chair of the presiding magistrate, often a consul. Before the dais stands the altar of victory, a golden statue of the winged goddess, a potent symbol of Rome's destiny that was a source of both reverence and, later, intense controversy. This is the inner sanctum of Roman power, and like every other public space in Rome, it is a theater of honor. But here, the rules are different. The performance is more subtle, the language more coded, and the stakes are infinitely higher. A meeting of the Senate was not a raucous debate in the modern sense. It was a highly ritualized and deeply serious affair. The proceedings would begin with a religious sacrifice, a prayer to the gods to guide the senators' deliberations. This act immediately framed the debate not as a mere political squabble, but as a sacred duty undertaken for the good of the state. The senators, who were mostly former magistrates and men from the oldest and wealthiest families, took their seats according to a strict hierarchy of precedence. Ex-consuls, the consulares, sat in the front rows, their opinions carrying the most weight due to their past service and accumulated dignitas. When it was time to speak, senators were called upon in this same order of seniority. There was no shouting across the floor. A senator would rise from his bench, and a respectful silence would fall over the chair.
A speech in the Senate was a masterclass in controlled rhetoric. A senator was not addressing a fickle crowd of commoners, but an assembly of his peers, men who were experts in the art of oratory and deeply sensitive to any breach of decorum. Wild gesticulation or overly emotional appeals were frowned upon. They were signs of a lack of gravitas. Instead, a speaker relied on logic, historical precedent, and above all, appeals to Roman tradition and honor. He would frame his argument in terms of what was best for the res publica, the public affair. He would invoke the examples of the great heroes of the past, Cincinnatus, Scipio, Fabius Maximus, to support his position. His goal was to persuade his fellow senators that his proposed course of action was the one most aligned with the ancestral virtues of Rome. Attacking a political opponent in this setting was a delicate art. A direct, vulgar insult would reflect badly on the speaker himself. Instead, insults were delivered with a cool, cutting irony, with subtle allusions and veiled accusations that every senator in the room would understand. One might praise an opponent for his flexibility, a subtle jab at his lack of firm principles. One might express concern for a rival's extravagant lifestyle, a polite way of accusing him of corruption and a lack of traditional Roman frugality. The entire debate was a slow, deliberate chess match of reputation. Every word was weighed, every argument carefully constructed to enhance one's own standing while chipping away at the dignitas of one's rivals. The ultimate goal of a senator was to build a consensus around his position, to be seen as a man of wisdom and foresight, a true guardian of the state. To be the senator whose opinion, the sententia, was ultimately adopted by the House was a great mark of honor.
The Soldier's Code. Let us travel now, far from the marble coolness of the Senate House to the raw and unforgiving edges of the Roman world.
We are on the German frontier, where the great dark forests press in on all sides, or perhaps on the dusty plains of Syria, where the sun beats down with a relentless heat. Here, honor is not a matter of subtle rhetoric or carefully arranged togas. It is something harder, more visceral, forged in discipline, tested in fear, and paid for in sweat and blood. It is the honor of the Roman legionary. His world is one of iron and leather, of mud and marching, of a loyalty so profound it eclipses all other ties. The soldier's code is built upon a foundation of three unshakable pillars: disciplina, virtus, and the sacred oath, the sacramentum. Feel the weight of the soldier's life upon your own shoulders. The lorica segmentata, the armor of overlapping iron plates, is heavy and restrictive, creaking with every breath and every step. The helmet, the gallia, is hot and confining, your world narrowed to what you can see through its cheek guards. The heavy shield, the scutum, strains your arm, and the short, stabbing sword, the gladius, rests on your hip, its familiar weight a constant, grim promise. The day begins before dawn, not with a gentle awakening, but with the sharp, commanding blast of a horn. The life of a legionary is a life of routine, of relentless, grinding discipline. This is disciplina. It is endless drill, marching in formation until the movement of 10,000 feet sounds as one, practicing with the sword and the javelin until their use is pure muscle memory, building fortified camps every single night, with perfect ditches and ramparts, no matter how exhausted the men are. This discipline was not mere punishment. It was the key to survival. It transformed a collection of individuals into a single.
Then there was virtus. We translate it as virtue, but its root is vir, the Latin word for man. For the soldier, virtus was martial courage. It was the ability to stand in the battle line, heart pounding, the air thick with the screams of the enemy and the clash of steel, and to hold your position. It was the courage to advance when the horn sounded, to step over the bodies of the fallen and trust in the man beside you. Virtus was a very public quality. It was recognized and rewarded. A soldier who showed exceptional bravery might be awarded a medal, a simple metal disc called a filera, or a torque bracelet called a torcus, often taken from a vanquished foe. To be decorated for valor by your general in front of the entire assembled legion was the highest honor a common soldier could achieve. It was a visible sign of his virtus, a mark of respect that he would carry for the rest of his life. But the soul of the soldier's code was the sacramentum, the oath. Upon enlistment, every soldier swore a sacred oath of allegiance. He swore to obey his commanders, to not desert his post, and to defend the standards of the legion with his life. This was not a modern employment contract. It was a religious vow. To break it was to invite the wrath of the gods. The standards, especially the eagle, the aquila of the legion, were holy objects. They were kept in a shrine in the camp's headquarters and were revered as the physical embodiment of the legion's spirit and honor. To lose the eagle in battle was the ultimate disgrace, a shame so profound that the legion itself might be disbanded. The men would rather die than allow their aquila to be captured. This absolute loyalty, this sworn fides to the standard and to their comrades, was what made the Roman army so formidable.
The shame of dishonor. We have spoken of the light of honor, the bright, shining quality that every Roman sought to cultivate. But every light casts a shadow, and in Rome, the shadow of honor was a place of profound darkness and chilling silence. This was the state of infamia. It translates to infamy or dishonor, but its meaning was a formal, legal, and social reality.
It was the official removal of a person's good name, a kind of civic death that left a person a ghost in their own society. To lose one's honor was not just a personal feeling of shame, it was to be publicly branded as untrustworthy, unworthy, and broken. It was a stain, a macula, that could be almost impossible to wash away. What could cause a Roman to fall into this state of infamia? The paths were many. A criminal conviction for a serious crime, such as theft or electoral bribery, would certainly lead to it. But so would actions that we might see as purely financial. Bankruptcy was not just a monetary failure. It was seen as a moral failure, a sign of poor character and an inability to manage one's affairs, and it brought with it the taint of infamia. Breaking a sacred trust, a bond of fides, could also lead to disgrace. So could certain professions. By their very nature, some lines of work were considered dishonorable. Actors, for instance, were automatically infames. The act of performing on a stage, of pretending to be someone, and displaying feigned emotions for money was seen as deeply undignified and lacking in the gravitas expected of a Roman. Gladiators, too. Imagine the life of a man declared infamous. The world, which was once open to him, now shrinks and closes in. When he walks through the Forum, the bustling heart of the city, he feels a change in the atmosphere around him. Men who once greeted him with a respectful nod now avert their eyes, pretending not to see him. Conversations fall silent as he approaches. He is no longer invited to the dinner parties of respectable citizens. His presence would be a social contamination, an embarrassment to his host. The law itself turns its back on him. A person in a state of infamia lost many of his civic rights. He could not vote in the assemblies. He could not stand for public office. Perhaps most devastatingly, he could not represent himself or others in a court of law. He was rendered legally voiceless, unable to defend his property or his person. He was a non-entity in the public life of the city he still called home. This shame did not just attach to the individual, it bled outwards, staining his entire family. A father's disgrace was a heavy burden for his children to bear. It damaged their own prospects, making it harder for a son to embark on a political career or for a daughter to secure an honorable marriage. The dishonor was a corrosive inheritance, a quiet poison in the family's legacy. For the elite, the ultimate expression of this dishonor was often exile. A senator convicted of a major crime would not be thrown into a common prison. He would be banished, forced to live out his days on some remote, lonely island in the Aegean, stripped of his wealth, his citizenship, and his name. This was considered a fate worse than death, for a Roman's identity was inextricably linked to the city of Rome itself. To be cut off from it was to be cut off from the source of his being. The fear of infamia was a powerful tool of social control. It was the dark consequence that lurked behind every public action, a constant, silent warning.
The father's authority, pater familias. Let us leave the public squares and the noisy barracks and step across the threshold of a Roman domus. We move from the public world into the private, but we do not leave the concepts of honor and duty behind. Here they take on a different shape, more intimate and absolute. The entire household, which could include not just a wife and children, but also married sons and their families, slaves and freedmen, all revolved around a single central son, the pater familias, the father of the family. His authority, known in Roman law as patria potestas, the power of the father, was one of the most unique and enduring features of Roman society. In theory, it was a power that was total and lifelong. Legally, the pater familias was the sole owner of all family property. Whatever his adult son earned, whatever dowry his daughter-in-law brought to the marriage, technically belonged to him. He had the right to arrange the marriages of his children, to sell them into slavery, And in the earliest, most severe days of the Republic, he even held the power of life and death over them, the vitae necisque potestas. This sounds to our modern ears like a recipe for tyranny, and it certainly could be. But this absolute legal power was held in check by a powerful set of unwritten rules and expectations. It was constrained by the mos maiorum, the way of the ancestors, and by the ever-present judgment of public opinion. A paterfamilias was not expected to be a despot. He was expected to be the chief protector, the chief provider, and the chief magistrate of his family. His honor depended on it.
Imagine him at the head of the dining couch during the evening meal. His place is one of honor. He leads the conversation. He is served first. His presence commands a quiet, ingrained respect. He is the guardian of the family's traditions and its reputation. Before making any major decision, such as disowning a son or agreeing to a marriage, a wise paterfamilias would summon a family council, a concilium. He would gather his adult sons, his brothers, perhaps his wife, and respected friends, and he would lay the matter before them. He would listen to their advice. He still held the ultimate authority to make the final decision, but by consulting others, he demonstrated that he was not acting on a whim or out of anger. He was acting with the gravitas and deliberation that his position required. A father who was consistently cruel, who mismanaged the family property, or who brought shame upon the household through his actions, would lose the respect of his peers. His dignitas would crumble, and he would be seen as a failure. The paterfamilias was also the chief priest of his family. Every morning, it was he who led the simple rites at the household shrine, the lorarium, making offerings to the guardian spirits of the home. He officiated at all the key moments of family life, the naming ceremony for a new baby, the wedding of a daughter, the funeral of an elder. In this role, he was the crucial link between his family and the divine, responsible for maintaining the pax deorum, the peace with the gods.
Women and household virtue. In the Roman household, ruled by the absolute authority of the paterfamilias, the role of the woman, the matrona, might seem secondary. But to think this is to misunderstand the Roman sense of place and duty. A woman's honor was not a lesser version of a man's. It was a different kind of honor altogether, pursued in a different sphere, but considered just as essential to the health and reputation of the family. While the man's world was the forum, the battlefield, the public stage, the woman's domain was the domus, the home. And within those walls, she was the guardian of a set of virtues that were the bedrock of the family's good name. The most prized virtue of a Roman matron was pudicitia. This is often translated as chastity or modesty, but it encompassed more than just fidelity. It was a quality of dignified reserve, of sexual modesty, and of a general demeanor that was free from impropriety. A respectable woman did not draw undue attention to herself in public. Her dress was modest, her speech was quiet, and her conduct was always above reproach. The story of Lucretia, a legendary figure from the founding of the Republic, was the ultimate cautionary tale. Her violation by the king's son and her subsequent choice to take her own life rather than live with the shame was seen as the catalyst for the overthrow of the monarchy. Her pudicitia was portrayed as being so pure and so essential to Roman identity that its desecration required a political revolution. This story, taught to every Roman girl, reinforced the immense weight placed on a woman's honor.
Another key symbol of female virtue was lanificium, the working of wool. In the atrium of a traditional Roman house, one might see the wife and her female slaves sitting together, spinning thread and weaving cloth on a loom. This was not just a domestic chore, it was a powerful symbol of her industry, her frugality, and her dedication to the household. Even the wealthiest matrons, who had dozens of slaves to do the actual labor, would be praised for overseeing the production of cloth for the family's clothing. It showed that she was not idle or given over to luxury, but was a productive and responsible manager of her domain. On a Roman tombstone, one of the highest praises that could be given to a deceased wife was the simple epitaph, Domi mansit, lanum fecit. She stayed at home, she made wool. It was a shorthand for a life of perfect, honorable domesticity. The Roman matron was the manager of the household. She held the keys to the storerooms, a symbol of her authority and trust. She directed the slaves, planned the meals, managed the budget for food and supplies, and most importantly, she was responsible for the initial education of her children. She was their first teacher of morals and tradition. The famous Cornelia, mother of the revolutionary tribunes Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, became a Roman ideal of motherhood. When a wealthy society lady was showing off her expensive jewelry, she asked to see Cornelia's. Cornelia, it is said, called her 2 young sons to her side and declared, "These are my jewels." Her honor and her legacy were not in material possessions, but in the character of the children she was raising to serve Rome. A woman's honor, therefore, was a quiet, powerful force. It was not paraded in public, but it was the invisible foundation upon which the family's public reputation was built.
Children taught the old ways. How did a society so steeped in unwritten rules and complex codes of honor ensure its continuation? It began in childhood. The education of a Roman child was not primarily about academics. It was a deep and sustained immersion into the mos maiorum, the way of the ancestors. From their earliest years, children were taught their place in the world, the duties they would one day assume, and the immense weight of the family name they carried. This education was less about formal lessons and more about absorption, observation, and discipline. The goal was to forge the next link in the long chain of Roman tradition. The path for a boy and a girl diverged early, each tailored to the sphere of honor they were expected to inhabit. A young boy from an elite family would spend his first years under the care of his mother, who would instill in him the basic stories of Roman heroes and the importance of piety and respect. But as he grew older, his education would shift to his father. This was a form of apprenticeship in being a Roman man. The boy would accompany his father on his daily rounds. He would stand quietly in the background during the morning salutatio, watching how his father treated his clients with a mixture of authority and generosity. He would walk behind his father to the forum, observing how he greeted other senators, how he conducted his business, and how he carried himself with gravitas. He might even be permitted to sit in a corner of the Senate House, listening silently to the great debates of the day. He learned by watching. He learned that his name was not just his own, but a legacy, and that his life's purpose was to add luster to it.
His formal education with a tutor, the grammaticus, would reinforce these lessons. He would be made to memorize long passages from the epic poems of Virgil and Ennius, which were filled with tales of pious heroes and courageous warriors. He would study the lives of great Romans from the past, learning to emulate their virtues. Later, a teacher of rhetoric would train him in the art of public speaking, not just as a practical skill, but as the essential tool for defending his honor and serving the state in the future. Discipline was strict. Physical punishment was common and considered necessary to forge a strong, resilient character. Weakness, emotional outbursts, and frivolity were to be beaten out of him. A girl's education was quieter, but no less serious. It took place almost entirely within the walls of the domus, under the watchful eye of her mother. She would not learn the art of rhetoric or the complexities of law. Instead, her education was a preparation for her role as a matrona. She would learn the skills of household management, how to direct slaves, how to manage supplies, and, most importantly, the symbolic and practical art of spinning and weaving. She would be taught the importance of pudicitia, of modest dress and reserved conduct. She would learn the family stories,
and the religious rites of the household, which she would one day be expected to carry into her husband's home. Her education was aimed at making her an honorable wife and a capable mother, a woman who could be the silent, steady anchor of her future family. For both boys and girls, education was fundamentally a moral undertaking. It was the slow, careful process of instilling the values that held their world together, ensuring that the quiet weight of reputation would be understood and carried forward by the next generation.
Slaves and service. In our journey through the Roman world of honor, we must now turn our attention to the shadows, to the vast population for whom honor, in the official Roman sense, was a legal impossibility. We speak of the enslaved. A slave in Rome was, by law, not a person but a piece of property, a res. They could be bought and sold, beaten and abused, with little legal recourse. They had no family name to protect, no right to vote, no public standing. And yet, to dismiss them from this story of honor is to miss a crucial and complex part of Roman life. For within the harsh reality of bondage, a parallel system of reputation, trust, and loyalty existed. For a slave, a good reputation was not a matter of dignitas, but a matter of survival, and perhaps a pathway to freedom. Imagine the sprawling household of a wealthy senator. It is a hive of activity, run by a large staff of slaves, each with a specific role. There is the cook in the kitchen, the porter at the door, the maids who attend to the matrona, the stable hands, and the scribes and accountants who manage the master's business affairs. In this rigid hierarchy, a slave's life could vary dramatically depending on their skills and their relationship with the master's family. A slave who worked in the fields or the mines lived a life of brutal, anonymous hardship. But a slave within the domus had the opportunity to carve out a niche for themselves, to become a trusted and valued part of the household. Their currency was not honor, but reliability.
A slave who demonstrated intelligence, honesty, and loyalty could be given immense responsibility. A skilled Greek slave might become the tutor, the paedagogus, for the master's sons, entrusted with their education and moral development. A slave with a mind for numbers could become the dispensator, the chief steward who managed the entire household budget and all the family's accounts, a position of enormous trust. The matrona relied on her personal maids not just for service, but for companionship and discretion. This trust, this fides between master and slave, was a fragile but powerful thing. A slave who earned it was rewarded with better treatment, better food, and a degree of autonomy. They might be allowed to earn their own money, a fund called a peculium, which they could use to purchase small comforts, or, with the master's permission, to eventually buy their own freedom. The master's honor was also tied up in this relationship. A master who was known to be excessively cruel to his slaves was seen as having a flawed character, lacking in the self-control and moderation expected of a Roman aristocrat. Conversely, the act of freeing a slave, known as manumission, was a public demonstration of a master's generosity, or libertas. It was an act that enhanced his own reputation. A freed slave, a libertus or liberta, entered the world as a new person, a Roman citizen, though with some restrictions. But they were not entirely free. They were bound for life by a duty of pietas to their former master, who was now their patron. They owed him respect and certain services, and he, in turn, owed them his protection. In this way, the web of honor expanded to include even those who had begun their lives as property. The path was difficult and uncertain, but for an enslaved person in Rome, the cultivation of a reputation for loyal and competent service was the single.
The household shrine, laures and penates. Let us return, one last time in this part of our journey, to the heart of the Roman home, the atrium. And let us pause before the small painted shrine that is the spiritual center of the household, the laurarium.
Here, in this humble space, the grand public concepts of honor, duty, and reputation are distilled into a quiet, daily, and intensely personal ritual. The lararium was home to the household gods, the silent, invisible members of the family who connected the living with the divine and with the generations that had passed. Tending to the shrine was not a mere superstition. It was a fundamental expression of the family's pietas and a constant, gentle reinforcement of the values that underpinned its honor. Look closely at the shrine. It might be a simple niche in the wall, or an elaborate freestanding cabinet made to look like a miniature temple. Within it are the small figurines. There are always two lares, depicted as joyful young men in short, dancing tunics, holding a drinking horn or a libation dish. They were the ancient guardian spirits of the land on which the house was built, the protectors of the family itself. Between them, often, is a figure representing the genius of the paterfamilias, his personal guardian spirit, a symbol of the life force and procreative power of the family line.
The day in a pious Roman household would begin and end here. In the morning, the paterfamilias, often accompanied by his wife and children, would approach the shrine. The ritual was simple but sincere. A small pinch of salted flour might be thrown onto a tiny brazier. A garland of flowers might be draped over the figurines. A crumb from a loaf of bread or a drop of wine from a cup would be offered as a share for the gods. A quiet prayer would be spoken, asking for protection for the day ahead and giving thanks for the family's continued existence. This simple act, repeated day after day, year after year, woven into the fabric of daily life, reinforced the entire structure of Roman honor. It reaffirmed the authority of the paterfamilias as the family's priest. It taught the children by example the importance of duty and reverence. It was a constant reminder that the family was more than just a collection of living individuals. It was a sacred institution, blessed by the gods and linked to the ancestors. The state of the lararium was a reflection of the state of the family. A well-tended shrine, clean and adorned with fresh offerings, signaled a stable, traditional, and pious household, an honorable household. A neglected shrine, dusty and forgotten, was a sign of disorder, a family that had lost its connection to its roots and its respect for the gods. It was a symptom of a deeper decay. The honor of the family, its public reputation, was therefore nurtured here in these quiet moments of domestic piety. It was here that the great, abstract virtues of Rome were brought down to earth, made tangible in the scent of burning incense and the soft glow of a single oil lamp, a silent testament to the belief that a family's good name was a sacred trust guarded by the gods themselves.
Honor in the law courts. Let us imagine ourselves now inside one of the great basilicas that flank the Roman Forum. These are not churches, but vast, covered public halls, their high ceilings supported by rows of mighty columns. The air within is cooler than the sun-baked stones outside, and it echoes with the low murmur of 100 conversations. This is a Roman law court, and a trial is underway. But we must understand that what is happening here is more than a simple determination of guilt or innocence. It is a desperate public battle for honor. For a Roman of any standing, a lawsuit was a direct assault on his dignitas, and the trial was his chance to defend not just his property or his freedom, but his very name. The scene is one of controlled chaos. A jury of senators or equestrians sits on raised benches, their faces impassive. A crowd of onlookers presses in, eager for the drama. The time for each speaker is measured by a clepsydra, a water clock.
its slow, steady drip a reminder of the fleeting opportunity to make one's case. The defendant, the man whose honor is on the line, does not typically speak for himself. To do so might betray an unseemly emotional investment. Instead, he hires a professional orator, an advocatus, a master of rhetoric who will plead his case for him. This orator is not just a lawyer, he is a warrior of words. Listen to his speech. He may spend some time on the facts of the case, but the bulk of his oration is dedicated to the character of his client. He will speak of his client's distinguished lineage, the great deeds of his ancestors.
Then comes one of the most powerful weapons in the arsenal of Roman legal defense: the character witnesses. A long line of distinguished men, friends and associates of the defendant, will come forward. They are not here to provide alibis or factual evidence. They are here to be laudatores, praisers. One by one, they will stand before the jury and testify to the defendant's sterling reputation, his lifelong commitment to Roman virtue. The sheer number and social standing of these witnesses is a testament to the defendant's dignitas. Finally, in a moment of pure theater, the defendant himself might be called upon to display his grief and humility. He might wear old, shabby clothes to elicit pity. He might parade his weeping wife and small children before the jury, a silent, emotional appeal to their sense of familial duty. This was not seen as undignified, but as a necessary part of the performance. The goal was to win, and victory was not just an acquittal, it was the public reaffirmation of one's honor. To lose was to suffer a devastating blow, to walk out of the basilica with the stain of shame clinging to you, a stain that all of Rome had just witnessed.
The gladiator's paradox. From the ordered drama of the law courts, let us journey to the roaring heart of Rome's most brutal entertainment, the amphitheater, the Colosseum. Feel the immense scale of the place, the tiered seats rising to the sky, packed with 50,000 spectators, a sea of faces roaring with anticipation. The air is thick with the smell of dust, sweat, and something metallic and sharp. Down on the sand of the arena floor, the sun glares with a pitiless intensity. Here we encounter one of the most profound paradoxes of Roman honor. We encounter the gladiator. He is a man legally defined by his complete lack of honor. He is infamous, a social outcast, often a slave, a prisoner of war, or a condemned criminal. And yet, if he is skilled and brave, he can achieve a level of fame and adoration that rivals that of any charioteer or actor. The gladiator's life is a walking contradiction. He is a piece of property, owned by a trainer, a lanista, and his life is not his own. He is trained in a harsh school, the ludus, where discipline is absolute. Before he ever steps into the arena, he swears a terrifying oath, the sacramentum gladiatorium, to be burned, to be bound, to be beaten, and to die by the sword. He willingly accepts his own potential destruction. This act of surrendering his will is the very opposite of the Roman ideal of self-control and freedom. He has, in a sense, given up all claim to personal dignity. A successful gladiator became a superstar. His image would be scratched as graffiti on walls. Poems would be written about his victories. The women of Rome were said to be infatuated with them. He was a symbol of raw masculine power, admired for the very qualities of courage and martial skill that were celebrated in a Roman general. If a gladiator survived long enough and fought with exceptional distinction, he could be awarded the rudis, a wooden sword symbolizing his freedom. He would be a freedman, but one who would forever carry the paradoxical status of a legend forged in shame.
The gladiator represents a deep and unsettling truth about the Roman character. Their simultaneous revulsion for and fascination with the display of courage by those they considered to be without honor. He was a hero and a non-person, a celebrity and a slave, living and dying in the stark, sun-bleached center of Rome's most troubling paradox.
Duels of reputation. Not all combat in Rome involved swords and shields. The most common and often most vicious conflicts were not fought in the arena or on the battlefield, but in the drawing rooms, the public baths, and the whispered conversations of the forum. These were the duels of reputation, the long, slow, and subtle wars of honor fought between the great families of Rome. These feuds, or inimicitiae, were a constant feature of aristocratic life, a game of social chess where the prize was not territory, but dignitas, and the weapons were influence, gossip, and public perception. Imagine two powerful senators, heads of ancient and proud families, who are locked in a rivalry. There will be no open brawling in the street. That would be undignified, a loss of gravitas for both. Instead, their conflict will play out in 100 small, carefully calculated moves. One senator might host an absurdly lavish dinner party, not just for the pleasure of his guests, but to publicly display a level of wealth and generosity that his rival cannot match. The next week, his rival might respond by making a massive donation to the public treasury or by sponsoring a new set of games for the people, a move calculated to win popular favor and make the first senator's dinner party seem like a petty indulgence. It was a constant battle of one-upmanship played out on the stage of public opinion. Gossip was a potent weapon. A powerful Roman would have a vast network of clients and supporters. He might quietly instruct them to spread a damaging rumor about his rival, a story of secret vices, of financial trouble, or of an impious disregard for the gods. The rumor would spread through the city like a fever, whispered in the markets and the bathhouses, until it became common knowledge.
Another tactic was to attack a rival's base of support. A senator might try to lure away some of his enemy's clients, offering them better legal help or more generous daily handouts. This was a direct strike at the rival's public influence, as the size of a man's client base was a visible measure of his power. In the Senate, the duel would continue in the form of subtle insults and obstructive political maneuvers. A senator might use his veto power to block a proposal by his rival, not because he disagreed with it on principle, but simply to humiliate his opponent and demonstrate his own superior power. These duels of reputation were a relentless, exhausting part of public life. They required constant vigilance, a thick skin, and a deep understanding of the subtle currents of social power. They were a reminder that in Rome, honor was not a static possession, but a precarious state of being that had to be defended every single day against rivals who were always watching, waiting for a moment of weakness.
Public shame and punishment. In a society so finely tuned to the nuances of honor, the response to its violation had to be equally powerful. Roman justice, especially for crimes that threatened the social or religious order, was not just about punishment, it was about public shaming. It was a form of theater designed to cleanse the community, to restore the balance, and to serve as a terrifying warning to others. The goal was not simply to inflict pain, but to strip the offender of their last shredding of dignitas, to make their dishonor a visible and unforgettable spectacle for all to see. For the Roman elite, the most dreaded punishment was exile, banishment. It was considered a fate worse than death itself. A convicted senator or public figure would be stripped of his citizenship and his property and sent to a remote, barren island in the Mediterranean. Imagine the scene.
The man who once walked the forum with a crowd of clients now stands alone on a ship, watching the shores of Italy, the land of his ancestors, disappear over the horizon. He is being cut off from the source of his identity. In his place of exile, he is a nobody, a man without a city, without a role, without a name that matters. The poet Ovid, banished by Emperor Augustus to the bleak shores of the Black Sea, wrote heartbreaking poems filled with a profound sense of loss, not just for his friends and family, but for the very lifeblood of Rome itself. He was a ghost, living a half-life in a land of strangers.
For the most despised figures, particularly emperors who had been declared enemies of the state after their death, the Senate could decree the ultimate punishment, damnatio memoriae, the damnation of memory. This was an attempt to officially erase a person from history. His statues were pulled down and smashed. His name was meticulously chiseled off every public inscription, from triumphal arches to milestones. His face would be scraped from family portraits. His laws were annulled. It was a chilling, systematic effort to make it as if he had never existed. It was the state's ultimate declaration that this person's life had been a wound on the body of Rome, a wound that had to be cauterized and forgotten. For the lower classes, public shame was more physical and brutal. Criminals were crucified along the major roads leading into the city, their slow, agonizing deaths serving as a grisly billboard warning against rebellion or serious crime. Other condemned prisoners were thrown to wild beasts in the arena, damnatio ad bestias, a spectacle of helplessness that entertained the crowds while reinforcing the state's absolute power. Even lesser punishments were public. A debtor might be forced to stand in the forum wearing a sign detailing his failure. The stocks, public flogging, all were designed to inflict not just pain, but humiliation. The core principle was the same. Honor was a public good, and its loss must therefore be a public spectacle. The shame of the individual served to reinforce the values of the community, a harsh and visible lesson in the terrible price of dishonor.
The triumph of a general. From the depths of public shame, let us now ascend to the absolute pinnacle of Roman honor. There was no greater glory, no more magnificent spectacle, no higher prize that a Roman could aspire to than to be awarded a triumph. This was not a medal or a title, it was an entire day. It was a grand, sacred, and riotously joyful parade through the streets of Rome, granted by the Senate to a general who had won a truly momentous victory against a foreign enemy. For one day, the victorious general, the triumphator, was elevated to a status that was almost divine. He was the living embodiment of Rome's power and Jupiter's favor. Imagine the city on the day of a triumph. All normal business has ceased. The streets are packed with cheering crowds who throw flowers and shout, "Io triumphe!" The air is filled with the scent of incense and the sound of trumpets. The procession is a river of glory flowing through the city. At its head are the captured enemy leaders, chained and forced to walk in humiliation, a living testament to Roman might. They are followed by wagons piled high with the spoils of war, sacks of gold and silver coins, captured enemy armor and standards, intricate works of art from conquered cities, and models depicting the key battles of the campaign. Exotic animals, never before seen in Rome, elephants, giraffes, leopards, are paraded for the marveling crowd. Then come the Roman soldiers, the legionaries, their armor polished, wearing crowns of laurel. For this one day, the strict rules of discipline are relaxed. They sang bawdy, often insulting songs about their general, a tradition that was meant to ward off the evil eye and keep their commander's pride in check. And finally, at the heart of the procession comes the triumphator himself. He rides in a magnificent four-horse chariot. He wears a special toga of royal purple embroidered with gold stars.
His face is painted red with vermilion, deliberately mimicking the appearance of the cult statue of Jupiter, Optimus Maximus, the greatest of the gods. He is, for this day, the earthly incarnation of Jupiter. He holds an ivory scepter, and a slave stands behind him in the chariot, holding a golden laurel wreath over his head. But this slave has another crucial duty. Amid the roaring adulation of the crowd, he is tasked with repeatedly whispering a simple, grounding phrase into the general's ear. The exact words are debated by historians, but the meaning was clear. Memento mori. Remember you are mortal. Or perhaps, remember to look behind you. You are only a man. It was a profound and necessary check on hubris. It was a reminder at the absolute zenith of human honor that this glory was temporary. The gods had granted this victory, and the gods could take it away. After winding its way through the city, the procession would end at the Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill. There the general would offer a sacrifice of white oxen and dedicate a portion of his spoils to the god, formally giving thanks and acknowledging the divine source of his success. The triumph was the ultimate public celebration of honor,
Philosophers and the quiet path. For all the public spectacle of triumphs and the high drama of the Senate, another idea of honor was taking root in Rome. It was a quieter, more internal, and in many ways more radical path. It was nurtured not in the crowded forum, but in the shaded porticos and peaceful gardens where philosophers taught. As Rome grew from a small city-state into a vast, complex, and often tumultuous empire, many began to seek a sense of worth that was not dependent on the cheers of the crowd, the favor of the emperor, or the fortunes of war. They found it in philosophy, particularly in Stoicism, which offered a revolutionary redefinition of what it meant to live an honorable life. The Stoics argued that true honor, true virtus, had nothing to do with external things. Wealth, status, health, and reputation were all, in their view, indifference. They were outside of our control, given and taken away by fortune. To base one's sense of self-worth on these things was to build your house on sand, to be a slave to circumstance. The only thing that truly belonged to you, the only thing you could control, was your own character, your own reason, and your own choices. True honor, therefore, was an internal state. It was the quality of your soul. It was about living a life of reason, self-control.
Imagine Seneca, one of the most famous Roman Stoics, a man who was immensely wealthy and a powerful advisor to the Emperor Nero. In his letters and essays, he constantly reminds himself and his readers that his wealth and power are fleeting. He practices poverty, sometimes living on simple food and sleeping on a hard pallet, not because he has to, but to train his mind not to fear their loss. His honor, he argues, is not in his senatorial rank, but in his ability to face misfortune with calm indifference and to act virtuously even when it is difficult. This was a fortress of the soul that no tyrant could breach and no turn of fortune could destroy. This philosophy was incredibly empowering because it made honor accessible to everyone. You did not need to be a noble or a general to be honorable. Epictetus, another great Stoic teacher, had been a slave. His body was owned by another man, but his mind, he argued, was absolutely free. He taught that a slave who mastered his own desires and fears, who lived a life of inner integrity, was more free and more honorable than an emperor like Nero, who was a slave to his own passions and his fear of others. This was a complete inversion of the traditional Roman social hierarchy. At the very top of the social ladder, we find the emperor, Marcus Aurelius, sitting in his tent on the cold German frontier, writing his private meditations. He is the most powerful man in the world, yet he is not writing about his victories or his glory. He is writing to himself, reminding himself to be just, to be patient, to be free from anger, and to do his duty without hope of praise. This quiet, internal struggle for virtue, he believed, was the only true measure of his worth. The path of the philosopher was a path to an honor that could not be given or taken away, an unshakable dignity found not in the eyes of the world, but in the quiet, steady judgment of one's own soul.
The whisper of the ancestors. How did a Roman family make its honor tangible? How could a young boy see and feel the weight of the legacy he was expected to uphold? The answer was in the atrium of his home, in the quiet, ever-present company of his ancestors. For in cabinets along the wall, the noble Roman family kept its most precious and sacred possessions, the images, the death masks of the ancestors. These were not idealized sculptures. They were remarkably lifelike portraits, cast in wax directly from the face of the deceased and then painted to look as they did in life. They captured every line, every wrinkle, every feature of the men who had served Rome as consuls, praetors, and censors. These were the faces of the family's honor. These masks were not mere decorations. They were a living part of the family's identity. On a normal day, they would rest in their wooden cabinets, their painted eyes seeming to watch over the daily life of the household. They were a silent, constant reminder of the mos maiorum, the way of the ancestors. A paterfamilias making a difficult decision might feel the gaze of his grandfather, a famous jurist, upon him. A young boy being correct.
When the procession reached the forum, the deceased would be propped up on the rostra. The actors wearing the masks of the ancestors would sit around him on ivory chairs, a ghostly assembly of the family's glory. A male relative, usually the son, would then deliver the funeral oration, the laudatio funebris. He would recount the life and achievements of the man who had just passed, and then, gesturing to the masked figures, he would recount the great deeds of each ancestor in turn. He was weaving the life of the newly deceased into the grand golden tapestry of the family's history. It was a powerful statement to all of Rome, a reaffirmation of the family's enduring dignitas. For the young people of the family watching this spectacle, the message was unmistakable. This is who you are. This is the legacy you carry. And one day it will be your duty to live a life worthy of being counted among these silent, honored faces.
The decline of the old codes. An idea as powerful as Roman honor does not simply vanish, but it can change. It can be stretched, warped, and diluted until it becomes something new and unrecognizable. As the Roman Republic slowly and painfully transformed into the vast autocratic empire, the old honor codes, which were forged in the crucible of a small competitive city-state, began to lose their meaning. The foundations upon which they were built, civic participation, collective responsibility, and service to the state, began to crumble, replaced by a new, more centralized and personal source of power. The historian Tacitus, writing with a bitter nostalgia in the early days of the empire, saw this decline all around him. He looked back on the heroes of the Republic as men of iron will and incorruptible virtue, and he saw the senators of his own day as sycophants and flatterers, their honor no longer dependent on their service to the state, but on their ability to win the favor of a single man, the emperor. When all real power, the ability to declare war, command armies, and pass laws, rested in the hands of one person, what did it mean to be a consul? It became an empty title, a ceremonial post, rather than the pinnacle of a hard-won career. The great debates in the Senate, once dual, Immense wealth flowing into Rome from conquered provinces was another corrosive force. The old Roman ideal was that of the frugal farmer-soldier, like Cincinnatus, who valued duty over luxury. But now, the elite competed in displays of extravagant wealth that would have horrified their ancestors. They built sprawling villas with heated floors and elaborate mosaics, and held dinner parties that were infamous for their exotic and wasteful cuisine. This life of luxury, critics argued, bred softness and moral decay. It replaced the stern gravitas of the old days with a new culture of pleasure-seeking and self-indulgence. The army, too, had changed. It was no longer a citizen militia that fought for the Republic and then returned to their farms. It was a professional, standing army, stationed on the frontiers for decades. A soldier's loyalty was no longer primarily to the abstract idea of the Senate and people of Rome, but to the general who led him, who paid him, and who promised him a plot of land upon retirement. This shift in loyalty from the state to an individual commander was a key factor in the repeated civil wars that plagued the later empire. An army's honor became tied to its general's ambition. The old codes did not die overnight. People still talked about dignitas and pietas, but their meaning was slowly hollowing out, the words remaining long after the world that gave them their profound substance had faded into memory. A new system was emerging, one where honor was a gift bestowed from above by the emperor.
Echoes in later centuries. The Western Roman Empire may have collapsed in the 5th century, its institutions overrun and its physical structures falling into ruin, but the idea of Rome, and specifically the Roman idea of honor, never truly died. It became a powerful ghost that has haunted the imagination of the Western world ever since, its concepts echoing down through the centuries, adapted and remixed by cultures that saw themselves as Rome's heirs. The language changed, the context was different, but the fundamental DNA of Roman honor proved to be remarkably resilient. Consider the knights of the medieval period. The code of chivalry, with its emphasis on loyalty to a lord, personal bravery, and a sworn oath, bears a striking resemblance to the Roman soldier's sacramentum and his devotion to his general and his standard. The knight's pursuit of personal glory or prowess on the battlefield or in the tournament is a distant echo of the Roman aristocrat's pursuit of dignitas and military renown. The very idea of a martial aristocracy, a class of men born to lead and fight, owes a great deal to the Roman patrician ideal. When the Renaissance dawned in Italy, scholars and artists,
this Roman echo traveled across the Atlantic and was fundamental to the creation of the United States. The founding fathers were steeped in the classics. They read Livy and Tacitus and saw in the history of the Roman Republic a cautionary tale of how a government of the people could decline into tyranny. They named their own upper house the Senate. They chose a Roman eagle as their national symbol. The ideal they held up for a leader was Cincinnatus, the Roman farmer who was granted absolute power to save the state and then willingly gave it up to return to his plow. George Washington was frequently called the American Cincinnatus for his willingness to step down from power. The neoclassical architecture of Washington, D.C., with its domes and marble columns, is a deliberate attempt to project the same sense of republican virtue and enduring dignity that the Romans had perfected. The quiet weight of Roman reputation, it turns out, has had a very long and very loud afterlife.
The eternal city never forgets. Our journey is coming to an end. Let us return one last time to the heart of Rome, but not the bustling, noisy city of the past. Let us walk through the Forum as it is today, a place of profound and beautiful silence. The sun warms the ancient stones underfoot. The wind whispers through the skeletons of basilicas
and the lonely, defiant columns of fallen temples. It is a landscape of ghosts, a place heavy with the memory of the lives we have observed. Here, on this very ground, orators fought their duels of reputation. Here, triumphant generals paraded their glory. Here, senators debated the fate of the world. Each man's every word and gesture weighed on the delicate scales of honor. The marble is broken now. The gold is gone. The roar of the crowd has faded into the hum of the modern city that surrounds the ruins. But the ideas, the pressures, the fundamental human drama that played out here still linger. The ruins themselves are a kind of testament to the Roman obsession with legacy. They built things to last, to project their honor and their name across the centuries. And in this, they succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. What we have been exploring is more than a historical curiosity. It is a deep dive into a world that took the concept of reputation more seriously, perhaps than any other. It was a world where a man's worth was a public performance, where duty to family, gods, and state formed an...
As we leave these ruins behind and let our minds drift back to the present, the quiet questions that Rome posed still echo. What is the source of our own honor? Is it found in the judgment of others, in the likes and the follows, the promotions and the praise? Or is it something quieter, more internal, a private knowledge of our own integrity, as the Stoics believed? How much of our identity is tied to our public face, and how much is reserved for ourselves? The Romans lived their lives in the full blare of these questions. They did not have all the answers, and their system was often brutal and unforgiving. But they never forgot that a life is a story told to the world, and that the quality of that story, the honor within it, was the most important legacy one could leave behind. The eternal city may have crumbled, but it never forgets, and in its silence it invites us to remember and to ask these questions of ourselves. Now, let these thoughts fade and allow the quiet of this ancient world to guide you into a deep and peaceful sleep.